The glass tower Dominic Foster stood at the edge of his penthouse terrace, 48 floors above a city that revered his architectural genius but knew nothing of the man himself. At 52, his salt and pepper hair and tailored suits had become as much his trademark as the revolutionary, sustainable buildings that had made him a fortune. The evening light caught the edge of his glass, the whiskey untouched as he surveyed the skyline a silhouette he had personally reshaped over 2 decades. The Foster Design Group employed hundreds, influenced global sustainable architecture trends, and had offices in 12 major cities, yet Dominic lived alone, his apartment a study in minimalist perfection, expensive but impersonal, like a high-end hotel suite perpetually waiting for its real occupant to arrive. Mr. Foster, the Henderson Foundation Gala begins in an hour. His assistant Tessa's voice came through the intercom, efficiently reminding him of obligations he'd rather avoid. These events were always the same. Wealthy donors congratulating themselves while eyeing his bachelor status as either an opportunity or a curiosity. His last relationship had ended 6 months ago when Vanessa had finally tired of competing with his work and his walls. "You build spaces for others to live in, but you don't actually live in the world yourself," she'd said during their final argument. Dominic adjusted his cufflinks platen with small emeralds, a gift from his grandmother, the only person who had ever truly known him, orphaned at 12 and raised by her strict but loving hand. He had learned early that emotional entanglements were temporary, while achievement endured. Across town, in a cluttered apartment above a neighborhood bookstore, Wren Ashby hunched over her drawing table. At 34, she had finally completed the illustrations for Forgotten Flora of the Pacific Northwest, a project that had consumed 3 years of her life. Her fingers were stained with ink, her chestnut hair escaping its loose bun as she carefully packed the final plates for delivery. The small apartment overflowed with live potted plants, claiming every available surface, botanical sketches taped to walls, and worn furniture bearing the comfortable indentations of use and time. Through the open window came the sounds of the neighborhood children playing, the occasional car, and the whisper of wind through the community garden she had helped establish 5 years ago. "You're late again," called her roommate Juniper, appearing in the doorway with a steaming mug. "The community center meeting started 10 minutes ago," Wren groaned, suddenly remembering the grand proposal. "I completely lost track of time." She hastily gathered her materials, the plans for expanding the community garden onto the abandoned lot next door, a project the neighborhood desperately needed but couldn't fund alone. "They won't start the real discussion without you," Juniper assured her. "You're the only one who can explain the vision properly." Wren rushed down the stairs and through streets lined with modest homes and small business, neighborhood fighting, gentrification with community solidarity. The meeting hall was only 4 blocks away, but as she rounded the corner, she collided with a solid former man in an expensive suit, causing her folder of carefully organized papers to explode across the sidewalk. "I'm so sorry." Wren dropped to her knees, frantically gathering her scattered work before the wind could claim it. Dominic Foster, running uncharacteristically late after changing his route to avoid reporters, found himself kneeling beside her, retrieving a beautifully rendered sketch of a garden design. "This is remarkable," he said, studying the illustration with professional interest. Wren looked up, momentarily struck by the contrast between his obvious wealth and the genuine appreciation in his eyes as he examined her work. "Thank you," she said simply, taking the drawing from his outstretched hand. "It's something we're trying to make real." Neither realized their worlds were about to collide in ways that would transform them both. Seeds of change 3 weeks after their sidewalk collision. Dominic found himself in unfamiliar territory both literally and figuratively. The community center in Wren's neighborhood was a far cry from the sleek conference rooms where he typically conducted business. The folding chair creaked beneath him as he listened to passionate residents discuss the abandoned lot's potential transformation. "The Foster Foundation's interest in our project is unexpected, but welcome," said Councilwoman Beatrice New, eyeing Dominic with cautious optimism. "Though we're curious why our little garden caught the attention of someone who usually designs skyscrapers." All eyes turned to Dominic, including Wren's. She hadn't expected him to actually appear when she'd impulsively sent the proposal to his foundation after recognizing him from their brief encounter. The invitation had been a long shot, born more of desperation after their original funding fell through. "Good design shouldn't be reserved for those who can pay premium prices," Dominic said, surprising himself with his candor. "When I saw Ms. Ashby's plans, I recognized something my own work has been missing: genuine community integration." After the meeting, Wren approached him as he studied the scale model of the proposed garden. "You didn't have to come in person," she said. "Most corporate sponsors just send a check and a junior associate." "I'm not most sponsors," he replied, tracing the miniature pathways with his finger. "And this isn't like most projects. You've designed something that grows with the community, not something imposed upon it." The following Saturday, Dominic arrived at the empty lot wearing jeans and a simple button-down clothes. His publicist would never approve for public appearances. He found Wren directing volunteers who were clearing debris, her hair tied back with a bandana, work gloves protecting hands that created such delicate illustrations. "You actually came," she said, not bothering to hide her surprise. I wanted to see the space properly. He rolled up his sleeves. Where do you need me? That first day stretched into evening, with Dominic working alongside local volunteers who gradually stopped whispering about the famous architect in their midst. He moved rocks, hauled compost, and listened as Wren explained her vision for a garden that would provide food, beauty, and a gathering place. You have dirt on your face, Wren told him as the day wound down, volunteers departing with tired waves. Dominic touched his cheek self-consciously. Probably not the only place. It's a good look, she laughed, humanizing. Over the following weeks, Dominic found himself drawn back to the garden project, canceling meetings that once seemed essential to make time for planning sessions in Wren's cluttered apartment. His assistant Tessa was baffled by his shifting priorities. The Tokyo project needs your attention, she reminded him one afternoon. As he was leaving the office, early Percy can handle the presentation, Dominic replied, referring to his business partner who had been increasingly vocal about Dominic's absences. That garden breaks ground tomorrow. What had begun as professional curiosity was evolving into something Dominic struggled to define. Wren challenged his assumptions about design, community, and purpose. She saw beauty in imperfection, value in collaboration, and possibility where others saw only limitations. One evening, as they shared a simple meal at a neighborhood cafe after a long day of work, Wren asked the question that had been lingering between them. Why are you really helping us? Your foundation could have just written a check. Dominic considered deflecting but found himself answering honestly instead. I've spent my career creating perfect spaces that few people can access. Your garden, it's messy and accessible and alive. It reminded me why I became an architect in the first place. And why was that? She asked, genuinely curious. To create spaces where people feel they belong. He looked down at his calloused hands, newly roughened from work that his wealth had long protected him from. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that buildings are meant to serve life, not the other way around. As twilight settled over the neighborhood, they walked back toward the garden site. Community members greeted Wren by name, gradually beginning to do the same with Dominic. The strangeness of it being known as himself rather than his reputation both unsettled and attracted him. Tomorrow everything changes, Wren said as they paused at the garden entrance. Once we break ground, there's no going back. Dominic wasn't entirely sure she was talking about the garden anymore, but he found himself nodding anyway. I think I'm counting on that. What neither could anticipate was how prescient her words would prove to be. Thorns and shadows. The garden project had progressed remarkably in just 2 months. Where there had once been rubble and forgotten trash, now stood neat rows of raised beds, a small greenhouse constructed from reclaimed materials, and the beginning framework for a community pavilion. Dominic had contributed not only funding but his expertise, working alongside local contractors who initially bristled at his presence but gradually came to respect his hands-on approach. That was a Tuesday morning when the first sign of trouble appeared. Dominic arrived at the garden to find Wren in heated conversation with a man in an expensive suit who looked comically out of place among the half-built structures. You can't just withdraw permissions that were already granted, Wren was saying, frustration evident in her voice. We've already invested in materials and labor. The zoning board is reconsidering the classification of this area. The man replied with practiced neutrality. All ongoing development needs to pause pending review. Dominic approached, and the man's expression shifted from bureaucratic indifference to recognition. Mr. Foster, I didn't realize you were personally involved with this project. The last word carried a faint note of disdain. James Whitfield, the man introduced himself with an extended hand. Hudson Development. We've met at several industry functions. After Whitfield departed with vague assurances about expediting the review, Wren turned to Dominic with suspicion clouding her usually open expression. What was that about? He completely changed his tone when he saw you. Politics, Dominic said grimly. Hudson Development has been trying to acquire properties in transitioning neighborhoods. This sudden zoning review isn't a coincidence. That afternoon, Dominic received an unexpected visitor at his office. Percy Vernon, his business partner of 15 years, arrived unannounced, dismissing Tessa's attempts to reschedule. We need to talk, Percy said, closing the door firmly. At 60, Percy represented the old guard of architecture, brilliant but traditional, focused on prestige projects and profitability. The board is concerned, Dom. This community garden project is consuming a disproportionate amount of your time, and frankly, it's raising questions. Questions about what? Dominic leaned back, already anticipating the direction of this conversation. About your focus, about the company's image, about your relationship with Ms. Ashby. Dominic kept his expression neutral. The Foster Foundation supports various projects. This one happens to align with our sustainability initiatives. This isn't about the foundation's money, Percy countered. It's about you personally laying bricks and digging in dirt with people who can't possibly advance our business interests. And then there's the matter of James Whitfield calling me directly. Whitfield called you. Hudson Development is considering us for their West Side project, $100 million contract. They've made it clear they expect a certain alignment of interests, which apparently doesn't include community gardens in neighborhoods they're planning to develop. Meanwhile, across town, Ren faced her own form of scrutiny. The community center buzzed with tension as she presented updates on the garden project. "We've heard rumors that this whole thing is just a publicity stunt for Foster," said Emmanuel Rodriguez, a longtime neighborhood activist, "that once he gets the photo ops he needs, he'll disappear and the development companies will swoop in." "That's not what's happening," Ren insisted, though the morning's confrontation with Whitfield had planted seeds of doubt. Juniper, usually her strongest supporter, looked troubled. "You have to admit, Ren, his sudden interest in our neighborhood is suspicious. Men like Foster don't change their priorities overnight without reason." Later that evening, as rain pattered against the greenhouse glass, Ren and Dominic sought shelter from the sudden downpour. The space was humid and intimate, filled with seedlings Ren had been nurturing for weeks. "Percy thinks I'm having some sort of midlife crisis," Dominic admitted, watching raindrops trace patterns on the transparent ceiling. "Are you?" Ren asked, gently repositioning a tomato seedling that had bent under the weight of its own growth. "Maybe," he conceded. "Or maybe I'm finally seeing clearly for the first time in years. My neighbors think you're using this project using us for good publicity before developers take over the area." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Is that what you think?" "I don't know what to think anymore," she admitted. "Hudson Development doesn't send representatives to halt small community projects unless there's serious money involved. And they clearly know you. I know how this world works, Ren. Developers target neighborhoods like yours because the land is undervalued but has potential. They pressure officials, create zoning obstacles, wait for community projects to fail, then swoop in to revitalize with luxury condos. And where do you fit into that world, Dominic? Because from where I stand, you benefit from the same system." The question hung between them, more significant than either wanted to acknowledge. "I need to know," she continued, her voice barely audible above the rain. "Is this garden just an interesting diversion for you? Something different to design before you go back to your real life?" Before he could answer, his phone rang. Percy calling for the third time that hour. Simultaneously, Juniper appeared at the greenhouse door, urgency in her expression. "Emergency meeting at the community center," she said breathlessly. "Hudson Development just filed paperwork to condemn several buildings on the block, including the bookstore." The seedlings continued reaching toward the light as Ren and Dominic moved in opposite directions, each pulled back to worlds that suddenly seemed irreconcilable. Breaking ground, the community center was packed beyond capacity, anxiety flowing through the crowd like an electric current. Residents who had lived in the neighborhood for generations sat alongside young families and small business owners, all united by a common fear. "They're calling it urban renewal," Councilwoman Nguyen explained, her voice tight with controlled anger as she projected Hudson Development's glossy proposal onto the wall. 68 properties targeted for acquisition, including the entire block surrounding our garden project. Ren studied the architectural renderings with growing horror. The soul of their neighborhood, the family-owned bakery, the bookstore beneath her apartment, the community center itself, all replaced by sleek mixed-use buildings with ground-floor retail spaces no local business could afford. "Where are the people supposed to go?" someone called out. "They're offering fair market value and relocation assistance," Beatrice replied, the air quotes audible in her tone. "But we all know what that means." As the meeting progressed, Ren kept checking her phone, hoping for a message from Dominic that never came. She felt foolish now for believing someone from his world could genuinely care about theirs. Across town, Dominic sat in a tense boardroom surrounded by the partners of Foster Design Group. Percy had called an emergency session, and the agenda was clear: Dominic's erratic behavior and its impact on the firm. "Hudson Development has officially rescinded their invitation to bid on the West Side project," Percy announced. "That's $20 million in potential fees gone because you've aligned yourself with community activists opposing their interests." "Their interests involve displacing hundreds of people," Dominic countered. "Since when is that our concern?" asked Margot Winters, the firm's oldest partner. "We design buildings, Dominic. We don't make housing policy." "Hudson isn't the only client expressing concerns," Percy continued. "Your public association with these protests." "I haven't participated in any protests," Dominic interrupted. "Your presence in that neighborhood, working alongside known community organizers, speaks volumes. The board feels it would be best if you took a temporary leave while we salvage these relationships." The silence that followed was deafening. Dominic looked around the table at colleagues he'd worked alongside for years, people who had helped build his vision but never really shared it. "This firm bears my name," he said finally. "I built it from nothing. And we're trying to protect what you built," Percy replied. "Take some time, clear your head, come back when this phase has passed." Dawn was breaking when Dominic's car pulled up to the garden. He hadn't slept, had barely registered the drive. The site was deserted except for a solitary figure kneeling among the raised beds. "You shouldn't be here," Ren said without looking up, her hands methodically working compost into the soil. "The neighborhood meeting last night was pretty clear about not wanting Foster money or influence anymore." "I'm not here as Foster Design Group," he said, setting down his jacket. That relationship is currently complicated. She finally looked at him, noting his rumpled appearance and the shadows under his eyes. What does that mean? It means I've been asked to take a leave of absence from the company I founded because my priorities no longer align with their profit margins. Ren's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry. Don't be. For the first time in years, I'm thinking clearly. He knelt beside her, taking a handful of soil. My grandmother used to say you can tell everything about land by feeling it between your fingers. This soil is alive. Dominic, what are you doing here? Really? I spent the night reviewing Hudson's proposal and the property records for this neighborhood. There's something not right about how quickly they're moving. Before Ren could respond, a small group appeared at the garden entrance. Emmanuel, Rodriguez, and several other community leaders. We agreed no more Foster involvement, Emmanuel called out, his stance confrontational. Hear him out, Ren surprised herself by saying, I think we might need his insider knowledge now more than ever. What followed was an unlikely alliance. Seated around a wobbly table at the neighborhood cafe, Dominic outlined what he'd discovered. Hudson Development had begun purchasing options on properties months before the zoning review was announced, working through shell companies to hide their intentions. They've manufactured this crisis, he explained, and they're using connections at the zoning board to force your hands. Knowledge is nice, Emmanuel said skeptically, but they have money and political influence. What can we actually do? For the first time in days, Dominic smiled. As it happens, I have both of those things too. Asterisk roots and wings. 6 months later, on a perfect autumn morning, Ren stood at the edge of what the neighborhood now called Renaissance Gardens. What had begun as a simple community garden had evolved into something far more ambitious. A 3-acre urban agriculture center with teaching spaces, a farmer's market pavilion, and affordable housing units designed to complement the existing neighborhood rather than replace it. Ready for the opening? Dominic asked, appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee from the local cafe. Hard to believe we actually pulled this off, she replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. The path to this moment had been anything but smooth. Hudson Development had fought viciously, leveraging political connections and threatening legal action. Dominic had countered by using his considerable influence and resources in unexpected ways. He'd taken his leave of absence from Foster Design Group and transformed it into a complete departure, selling his controlling shares to fund what became the Neighborhood Preservation Trust. Working with community leaders and sympathetic officials, the trust had systematically purchased key properties throughout the neighborhood, placing them in a community land trust that ensured long-term affordability. Mr. Foster called Beatrice Nugent, now not just a councilwoman but the newly elected district representative. The press is arriving. We should get you both in place for the ribbon cutting. As they walked toward the gathering crowd, Dominic reflected on the changes these months had brought. His penthouse sat empty, listed for sale. He'd taken a small apartment above the neighborhood hardware store, a space that felt more like home than anywhere he'd lived in decades. The professional consequences had been significant. Percy and the board had publicly distanced themselves from him, rebranding the firm and losing no opportunity to characterize his choices as a breakdown rather than an awakening. Former clients had abandoned him. Industry publications had run features questioning his judgment. Yet for every relationship lost, new and more meaningful connections had formed. He now served on the Community Land Trust Board alongside people who had initially viewed him with suspicion but now counted him as an ally. His design skills found expression in affordable housing projects and community spaces rather than luxury towers. They're saying some nice things about you in the press today, Ren noted as they passed a newspaper stand featuring his photograph. Architectural Digest is calling you visionary again, though for different reasons than before. The industry always comes around once something proves successful, he said with a shrug. What matters is that this works for the people who live here. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Children from the neighborhood school performed a song they'd written about the garden. Local business owners who had feared displacement now celebrated expansion. Dominic stood somewhat uncomfortably in the spotlight, still adjusting to this new form of recognition. As the formal proceedings concluded, he found a quiet moment with Ren among the herb gardens she had so lovingly designed. I have something for you, he said, producing a small wooden box from his pocket. Inside lay a simple key. What's this for? She asked. The studio space above the market pavilion. I thought you might want a dedicated place to work on your illustrations. The light there is exceptional. Ren touched the key gently. You know, when we met, I thought you were just another wealthy man playing at charity. I never expected you to risk everything you'd built. I didn't risk everything, he corrected her. I just exchanged one form of wealth for another. In the distance, Juniper was leading garden tours, Emmanuel was organizing a group of volunteers, and throughout the space, people moved with purpose and belonging. What had begun as an abandoned lot had become the heart of a community that refused to be erased. You once told me that good design should serve life, Ren said, slipping her hand into his. I think we've managed that here. Around them, the garden flourished not with the manicured perfection of his former projects, but with the vibrant, sometimes messy reality of genuine growth. Vegetables ripened alongside flowers planted by neighborhood children. The pavilion he'd designed incorporated suggestions from residents, resulting in something more functional and beloved than any award-winning structure in his previous portfolio. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, the question that had lingered between them through months of struggle. "Giving up the empire you built?" Dominic looked around at the garden, at the neighborhood beyond, and finally at Wren herself, the woman whose vision had awakened his own. "I didn't give up an empire," he said, his voice certain. "I found a home." As afternoon light filtered through the newly planted trees, casting dappled shadows across paths that would serve this community for generations, Dominic Foster, once known only for towers of glass and steel, discovered that his greatest design had been the one that allowed him to break down his walls and let something new take root.